I'm leaving you and moving to Palm Springs with my 25-year-old babe. I'm taking all our money with me. The message lit up my phone at 3 a.m. Gulf time, right after I dragged myself through a 14-hour shift on the rig. My name's Miles Harrington. I'm 52, and I've spent nearly 3 decades working oil platforms across the globe. My hands were still slick with grease when I read that text from Krista, my wife of 18 years. I stared at the screen as another message popped up. A screenshot. Our joint account, where $142,000 should have been, now reads 0. She'd even thrown in a kiss emoji, like this was some kind of joke. I didn't smash my phone, didn't curse or scream. I just sat there on my bunk, wedged in with 2 other riggers, and typed, "Sure. Good luck." Then I shut the phone off and walked to the showers. The next morning, I skipped breakfast, went straight to the job. Jackson, my second in command, kept giving me those sideways looks during safety checks, but he didn't ask. Smart guy. We had 16 men depending on us to keep this floating steel monster alive. No room for personal drama. At lunch, I checked my email. Krista had already filed. Claimed I'd abandoned the marriage by being overseas too often. She'd hired a lawyer named Bradley, high-asset divorce specialist. They were going after spousal support, calling my pay excessive. She even wrote that her emotional support partner was now living in our home back in Odessa. I closed the laptop. Said nothing. That night, I sent one email, not to Krista, but to Brendan, my cousin, an accountant in Houston. Time to activate Protocol Winter, I wrote. No further explanation needed. 3 minutes later, he replied, "Already on it. Don't respond to anything until you're stateside." 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks of 12-hour shifts in blistering, 110-degree heat, while my life disintegrated an ocean away. I could have asked for emergency leave. The guys would have understood. But for what? Better to finish the job, earn the check, keep moving. That night, as I was turning in, the rig's supervisor, Vincent, poked his head into our quarters. "Everything stable?" he asked. He wasn't just talking about the drill. "Everything's under control," I said. And it was, more than Krista would ever realize. I met her 19 years ago in Odessa at my buddy's fishing supply store. She was 31, working the register, cracking jokes about city folks who didn't know a spinnerbait from a beer tab. I was 33, home between contracts, helping stock inventory. 11 months later, we were married. It made sense back then. I had a solid life. Owned my house outright from an early oil investment, and my career on the rigs was steady, international, well-paying. She said she admired my discipline, my drive. I admired her spark, the way she could light up a room. The rotation schedule was always the trick, 2 months on, 1 month off. But the pay? I could make in 6 months what most folks earned in 3 years. We agreed it was worth it. She held down the home. I built the future. Around year 12, the cracks began to show. Small things, missed birthdays, pointed comments about dinner parties and husbands who were actually home. She asked if I really had to take the Saudi contract. I brushed it off. At 47, she stopped asking when I'd be back. Stopped sending photos. Our video calls got shorter. I thought it was just routine, comfort settling where excitement used to live. Last Christmas, I came home to a completely redecorated house. New paint, new furniture, new vibe. When I asked about it, she said I needed a change. I didn't ask what kind. 2 months ago, I noticed strange transfers from our joint account. "House repairs," she said. "Foundation issues." I drove past the house before this rotation. No sign of repairs. But there was a black Audi parked in the drive, one I'd never seen before. For weeks ago, she stopped answering calls. Just texts. Busy with a new project. I almost flew back early. Almost. Instead, I convinced myself to trust the woman I'd been married to for 18 years. 3 days ago, our neighbor Harold sent me a photo of a moving truck outside our house. "Thought you should know," he wrote. I didn't reply, just waited. Sometimes, the best move is no move at all. Sometimes, truth finds you. The day after Krista's text, I wrapped my shift and headed back to my bunk. The satellite phone rang. It was Brendan. "You sitting down?" he asked. "Just tell me." No sugarcoating. She'd been planning this for over a year. Quiet transfers, steady, into an account under her maiden name. It started small, $2,000 here, 3 there. Then the withdrawals grew. Over the last 90 days alone, she'd siphoned off $214,000. Not just the $142,000 from our joint savings, much more than I'd even realized we had access to. For a moment, the room tilted. My bunk shifted under me, though I hadn't moved. That number, it didn't make sense. It meant she'd been pulling from places I hadn't thought to look. Brendan's voice cut back in. She changed the beneficiary on your life insurance policy 6 months ago, and she took out a $40,000 home equity line, signed your name. The forged signature. I could practically feel the hum of the rig's generators vibrating through the floor, steady and deep, like a heartbeat trying to stay calm. 18 years. Nearly 2 decades of marriage. And for the past year, she'd been quietly deleting me from our life. One signature, one transfer, one lie at a time. What about the guy? I asked. Devin Forrester, Brendan said. 25. Just like she said. Former personal trainer. No job history to speak of. 3 past relationships with women over 45. All ended within 18 months. He didn't need to spell it out. I saw the pattern. Then Brendan's tone darkened. There are charges for 2 one-way tickets to Palm Springs, set for Tuesday. 3 days from now. She wasn't just walking out. She was vanishing, trying to disappear with everything before I even set foot on American soil. I hung up, sat there in the dark, didn't bother turning on the light. Just sat. Let the silence expand. Memories shifted in my mind, realigned themselves. Those late-night calls she'd always taken outside. The sudden obsession with fitness 3 years back. The way she'd started complaining about money, even though we were fine. What gutted me wasn't the betrayal. It was the precision. The slow, methodical erasure of a life. Our life, while she still smiled at me. While she took the money I sent. Told me she loved me. Said she missed me. Something inside me hardened. Froze. I walked to my locker, pulled out the laptop. Logged into the account only Brendan and I knew. Opened up Winter Light Holdings, named after my grandmother's maiden name and the little creek on our land. Balance, $1.6 million. I'd been diverting 70% of my income there for 8 years. Fully legal. Declared. But thanks to Brendan's structure, completely separate from our marital assets. I typed one email to my lawyer in Houston. Proceed with Operation Cold Return. Then I closed the laptop and went to the mess hall. Got a cup of coffee. For the first time in days, I felt hungry. 38 hours after my rotation ended, I landed in Houston. Brendan met me at the airport with a burner phone and a folder. She's been blowing up your regular number since yesterday, he said as we walked to the car. The bank froze the account she transferred everything into. Standard when there's a sudden, suspicious move like that. They need you to verify in person. She doesn't know I'm back? No one does. Except me. And Thomas. Thomas, my lawyer. But that's not the most interesting thing, Brendan added, unlocking his tablet. Check this out. Text messages. Between Krista and someone saved as D. I scanned them. Plans. Palm Springs. Jokes about me working while they spent my money. House deposit already down. Then, one thread stopped me cold. Krista, bank froze the money. Need Miles to verify in person. What do we do? D. He's still on the rig another 10 days. Krista, tell him it's an emergency with your mom. Get him to authorize you. You're still his wife. Krista, he's not answering. D. Try harder. We need that money before closing. Or we go with Plan B. Krista, I'm not comfortable with Plan B. D. It's just insurance money. He works a dangerous job for a reason. Accidents happen all the time. I handed the tablet back. My hands were steady, but cold. These admissible? I asked. She used your Apple ID when she set up her new phone. Never changed the password. Everything's synced to your cloud. We drove straight to Thomas's office. He already had divorce papers ready. A criminal complaint for forgery. An emergency motion to freeze all assets. But there was a catch. She filed a domestic violence claim yesterday, Thomas said. Claims emotional abuse and financial control. Says she feared for her safety. That's insane. I've been 6,000 miles away for 7 weeks. Doesn't matter. It's a tactic. Gets the judge's sympathy. Sets her up to argue for exclusive use of the house. Emergency hearing is scheduled for tomorrow. So now, it wasn't just about loss. Or betrayal. It was war. So she wants me banned from my own property while her boyfriend sleeps in my bed? I asked. Thomas nodded. And there's more. That $40,000 from the home equity loan? She's already spent it. Transferred the full amount to an LLC registered under Devin Forrester, 3 days after receiving it. I let out a slow breath, grounding myself. Options. We counterfile. Immediately, Thomas replied, "Fraud, forgery, alienation of affection, criminal conspiracy based on those text messages. We request an emergency freeze on all her personal accounts and the LLC." Then he slid a document across the desk. "We also file this." I looked down. Motion to dismiss domestic violence claim. Evidence of perjury attached. What evidence? Thomas gave a thin, satisfied smile. "Your location data from your company's security badge confirms you haven't left the rig in over 7 weeks. Passport stamps back it up. I also subpoenaed your phone records. Every call and message between you and Krista for the past year. Not a single threat. No arguments. Nothing to support her claims." I signed where indicated. "One more thing," he said. "You'll need to look surprised when she gets served. As far as she knows, you're still offshore." I nodded. "I can do that." As I left Thomas's office, my regular phone buzzed. A text from Krista. "Please call me. It's an emergency. I need you." I didn't answer. The trap was set, just not the one she thought. That night, I stayed at Brendan's. Slept better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I logged into the security camera feed for our house in Odessa, a system I'd installed and maintained remotely for years. Krista must have either forgotten it existed or assumed I couldn't access it from halfway across the world. There he was, Devin, lounging by my pool, sipping from my whiskey, wearing my old college sweatshirt like he owned it. He was on the phone, grinning, his feet propped up on furniture I'd built by hand. Then Krista appeared, pacing, visibly anxious. Her arms moved sharply, her steps restless. Something wasn't going to plan. Brendan walked in with 2 coffees. "You should see this," he said, flipping open his laptop. He'd been digging deeper into Devin's past. What he found chilled me. He's done this before. 3 times. He turned the screen toward me. News articles, court filings, social media scraps. Same pattern, every time. Meets a financially stable, often married woman. Relationship escalates. She leaves her husband, drains accounts, hands over control. Within 18 months, Devin disappears, usually with everything. One woman was still paying off nearly $80,000 in debt he'd racked up under her name. "And there's more," Brendan added, voice quiet now. He was briefly a person of interest in the death of one woman's ex-husband. Suspicious crash 6 weeks after their divorce was filed. Longtime resident. Knew that road like the back of his hand. No charges were ever filed. But the implication hung in the air like oil smoke. My phone rang again. Krista. Same number. I let it go to voicemail. "You should hear this," Brendan said, pressing play. "Miles, please call the bank. There's been a misunderstanding. I was just moving money into a safer investment like we talked about, but now I can't access anything. They froze it. I'm really scared. Please tell them it's okay." We had never talked about any such investment. 2 weeks ago, I might have believed her. Might have dropped everything to fix it. "She's panicking," Thomas said when we met for lunch. "The house in Palm Springs closes in 5 days. They're out of time. What's our next move?" I asked. "Emergency hearing this afternoon. Judge Winters is presiding. She doesn't tolerate false claims. Your alibi is airtight. The bank's already been served a motion to release the funds exclusively to you." Then Thomas slid a folder across the table. "Your neighbor Harold sent these to my office this morning. Inside, photos. Movers loading furniture into a truck. My furniture. Family heirlooms. Things passed down for generations. Gone. They're clearing out," Thomas said. "Planning to disappear whether they get the money or not." I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. Change of plans. Thomas and Brendan looked at me. "I want to go home." "That's not advisable before the hearing," Thomas began. "Not to confront them," I said. "To watch. I wanted to see it with my own eyes, from Harold's place, just across the street." Brendan and Thomas exchanged glances, but I didn't wait for their approval. "And I want to be there when they're served," I said, not hiding behind legal briefs. "I want Krista to see my face when her carefully stacked world collapses." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'll arrange it." As we stepped out of the restaurant, my burner phone buzzed. A text from Harold. "They're packing your grandfather's desk now, the one you restored. Thought you'd want to know. Some thefts bleed your bank account. Others go deeper, down where it scars the soul." The 6-hour drive to Odessa gave me time to think. Thomas scheduled the sheriff to serve the papers at 9 a.m. the next morning. Brendan coordinated surveillance from Harold's house, where I'd stay the night. Harold met me just after midnight with a firm, wordless handshake. 30 years working rigs. No need for explanations. She have any idea you're watching? I asked once we were inside. None, he said. They've been at it all day, packing the good stuff, leaving the junk. He gestured to the front window, angled perfectly toward my driveway. 2 trucks came already. Bigger ones are due in the morning. Anyone else stop by? Some woman with a clipboard yesterday. Looked like a real estate agent. That one caught me off guard. They're selling the house. Listing, anyway. I saw her taking pictures. I called Thomas. He promised to check the property records first thing. At 3 a.m., restless, I sat at Harold's kitchen table reviewing every document Brendan had compiled. Bank statements charting the slow bleed of our finances. Call logs showing hours of late-night conversations with Devin. Hotel charges right here in town. Billed on weekends, she'd told me she was visiting her sister. It wasn't an affair, it was an operation. A year-long extraction. A cold, deliberate dismantling of everything I thought we'd built. By sunrise, Thomas had confirmation. Krista listed our home 2 days ago, priced 30% below market for a fast sale. Forged my signature on the paperwork. At 8:30 a.m., I watched them load the last of the valuables into Devin's black Audi. My grandmother's silver frames. The antique watch my father left me. All casually tossed and like they meant nothing. At 8:45, a large moving truck rolled up. 3 men got out, right on time. At 8:55, an unmarked car pulled in behind it, boxing it in. 2 sheriff's deputies and a court officer stepped out, briefcases in hand. I turned to Harold. It's time. I crossed the street, stepping just out of view as the deputies approached my front door. Krista answered, her face hard with irritation, until the officers identified themselves. I stayed in the shadows, watching her expression dissolve, annoyance to confusion, then fear. She called for Devin. He appeared behind her, possessive hand on her waist. That's when I stepped into view. Her face went pale. Her breath caught in her throat. Miles, she whispered. You're supposed to be on the rig. Surprise, I said quietly, and gave the deputies a nod. They handed her a thick envelope, restraining orders, asset freezes, a criminal complaint for forgery, nullification of the home sale, and divorce filings citing fraud and conspiracy. You can't do this, Devin snapped, chest puffed. She's afraid of you. We filed a domestic violence claim. Dismissed this morning, I said, cutting him off. Hard to abuse someone from 6,000 miles away. His face slackened. The judge was particularly interested in your text about Plan B, the one involving my life insurance. Krista stepped forward, her eyes glistening. Miles, this is all a misunderstanding. I was just saving our assets. I finished by clearing out our house, selling it behind my back. She had no reply. You have 30 minutes, the court officer said, her voice flat. Personal items only. Clothing and toiletries. Everything else stays pending inventory. As they went inside under supervision, I turned to leave. Where are you going? Krista called after me. I didn't turn around. Home. 3 weeks later, we stood before the judge. I sat beside Thomas. Krista and her lawyer faced us. Devin was nowhere in sight. He'd vanished 2 days after being served, taking the last of Krista's cash and the rest of her jewelry. A perfect repeat of his past. The judge took her time, methodical and deliberate, reviewing every piece of evidence we'd laid bare. The judge sifted through the bank records, forged documents, phone logs, and GPS data without flinching. But when she reached the text messages, the ones about Plan B and my insurance policy, she paused, looked up, stared directly at Krista. Mrs. Harrington, she said, her voice sharp as a gavel. Are you aware of the penalties for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud? Or worse? Krista's lawyer leaned in fast, whispering furiously. Krista swallowed, voice trembling. It wasn't like that, Your Honor. Devin was just joking. I never. Save it for the criminal proceedings, the judge cut her off. This court handles asset division and dissolution of marriage, not indictments. She continued reading, eyes darkening with every page, her head shaking in disbelief. When she finished, she set the papers down, removed her glasses, and looked at Krista with something colder than disappointment. In 30 years on the bench, she said, I've rarely seen a clearer case of premeditated financial deception between spouses. She turned to me, her tone shifting, still firm, but touched with something like respect. Mr. Harrington, while the creation of your holding company might raise eyebrows, The evidence shows you paid all household expenses, filed accurate taxes, and made no attempt to conceal assets from the government. You acted not to defraud, but to shield your earnings from potential bad faith. Her ruling came fast and final. All funds Krista had moved would be returned to me. The house remained in my name alone. Her claim for spousal support, denied. Most satisfying of all, she referred the evidence of forgery and conspiracy to the district attorney for criminal review. As we exited the courtroom, Krista moved to speak to me, eyes wide, mouth trembling. I didn't stop, didn't say a word. Some victories don't need commentary, just distance. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of a log cabin tucked into the mountains near Missoula, Montana. 40 acres of pine and wildflower meadow, quiet land I'd bought 5 years ago through Winterlight Holdings, always meant as a retirement refuge. Kristen never even knew it existed. Her charges had been reduced in a plea deal. No jail time, but 5 years probation and court-ordered restitution she'd never repay. Last I heard, she was in Tulsa, crashing with her sister and folding shirts at a department store. Devin, on to his next mark, a divorce doctor in Scottsdale. Patterns don't change. Predators just move zip codes. I'd taken early retirement. 27 years on the rigs was enough. Between smart investments, residual gas royalties from a patch of land in Arkansas, and my savings, I had everything I needed. I'd sold the house in Odessa. Too many ghosts in those walls. Harold had packed the heirlooms and shipped them to Montana. Everything else went to donation bins and secondhand stores. I didn't look back. That afternoon, the mail brought an envelope from Brendan. Inside, final paperwork. Winterlight Holdings officially dissolved. Assets transferred. Taxes settled. The chapter closed. As the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, I poured a glass of bourbon and settled into the porch swing I'd built with my own hands that summer. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. The only sound, the wind through the trees. No crew waiting on orders. No wife pretending to care. No more lies. Just peace. Hard-earned. Mine. My phone rang. A new project manager from a Canadian firm, offering a consulting role. High pay. Minimal travel. Just passing on knowledge I'd spent a lifetime earning. I'll think about it, I said. And I would. But not tonight. Tonight was for silence. For the stillness I'd bled to reach. For a life that finally belonged only to me.